Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Longmont Startup Week, Day 2. My name is Caroline Hafley, and I'm the Executive Director of Entrepreneurship for All, also known as EforAll and para Todos. I am so excited to be here with you guys this morning. We have an exciting morning of Recalibrate. So we are going to kick things off with a panel discussion on the future of entrepreneurship in America. From after that, we are going into accounting and the essentials of forecasting. And from 11 to noon, we will talk about customer acquisition and retention and curating the right sales team. So we have a good lineup today, and I'm excited to be here with you guys. Okay, so to kick things off this morning, we have the co-authors of The New Builders, Seth Levine and Elizabeth MacBride. And we have they're joined by two Entrepreneurship for All entrepreneurs, Adriana Paula Palacios Luna and Lauren Jenkins. Okay, and so, okay, sorry about that. So Seth Levine is actually a Longmont local and a venture capitalist. He has been working in the venture scene for the past 30 years, and he's a partner at the Foundry Group in Boulder. And he has also been very involved in the launch of EforAll in Longmont. So I'm going to kick things off with him. I think we're waiting a couple more minutes. But in the meantime, I will take advantage of this to tell you about a bit more about EforAll. EforAll is a nonprofit organization that partners with communities nationwide to develop a more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. We have been in Longmont since January of 2020. And since then, we have ran 4 accelerator programs, worked with 42 local companies, of which 74% have been women-owned, 66% BIPOC-owned, and 54% immigrant-owned. So EforAll is really, our mission is to turn dreams into businesses, and we are really dedicated to helping everybody make those dreams into reality. So The New Builders is a great segue into the importance of building an inclusive entrepreneurial community. The New Builders are, and I will let Seth and Elizabeth speak more to this from their book, but they really outline the current state of entrepreneurship in America today and how in the past 10 years or so, it's really, the word entrepreneurship has really been turned into a focus on high growth technology companies, which are very important into the development of our economy, but there's also the small businesses in all of the communities across the US that are kind of the heart and the grassroots movement of economic and social development. And so I'm really excited for you guys to hear from them today, and we will have an opportunity to, for people in the audience, we'll have an opportunity to win a free book, a free New Builders book, for those of you who haven't had a chance to read it yet. It's a wonderful, wonderful outline of the current state of entrepreneurship, and really focuses on how the need to support these entrepreneurs. Okay, great. Okay. So Lauren and Adriana, if you guys want to turn your cameras on, we're waiting on Seth and Elizabeth, but we could go ahead and start with you guys. Hello. Welcome. So good to see you guys.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
for
for
having me.
joining us.
Hi, thank you.
Okay. So I'd love to hear, well, first of all, your first elevator pitch, and yeah, introduce yourselves and tell us about your companies. Lauren, you want to go first? Sure.
Sure, it's all good. So yeah, it's nice to meet you guys. I'm Lauren Jenkins. I grew up in Longmont. And I started a company called Mini Money Management with my mom. So she actually taught me about money growing up by turning the house into an economy. So I had to pay for rent and utilities and food. And the big thing that I learned growing up is that you get some money in, you save it, you make sure you take care of your needs, and then you have fun with the rest. And so we focus on teaching kids and actually adults about the basics of money through a virtual learning platform. So yeah, glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. And Adriana?
Mm, Yes, hi, good morning. And my name is Adriana Paola Palacios Luna, and I am the founder of Luna Cultura, Art, Science, and Culture for Thriving Communities. And well, Luna Cultura is a bilingual and intercultural space where we provide services of training, consulting, and research services in the fields of art and maker education. And we do have this approach of intergenerational and collective learning. We recover the tradition from our ancestors, but we do a fusion learning with the new technologies and everything. And we're trying to build a leadership and a strong community of makers, moving forward to social and environmental justice. And yeah, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adriana. And just so everybody knows, sorry, just so everybody knows, Lauren participated in our accelerator program, in our first accelerator program in Longmont, and Adriana participated in our first fully Spanish accelerator program in Longmont as well. Okay, so it looks like Seth and Elizabeth are here. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. How's your morning?
Great so far. How about
we're a little ahead of you. We're both on the East Coast,
Yeah.
so we've had more of a morning. Sorry about
Yes.
the little glitch there.
No worries, it's all good. We're happy to have you guys here. So we were just presenting Lauren and Adriana, and we will go back into, I kind of described the new builders and started going into that. And so if you don't mind, we can just go ahead and jump in. And if you want to go ahead and present yourselves first, and then we can jump into questions, that works too.
Okay, great. So Seth's pointing at me. So I'm I'm Elizabeth MacBride. I am a co-author along with Seth, who's here as well, of The New Builders, which is a book about, the subheadline is The True Future of American Business. And it's really a book about the rising generation of American entrepreneurs. And I'm happy to say that it is the rare small business book that's kind of poked its head into the national conversation. And we hope drawn some attention both generally to how tough it is to be a small business owner in the United States today, and also to the fact that the new generation of entrepreneurs looks very different than the generations that have gone before. And I should say, I'm not only the co-author of The New Builders, I'm also a journalist for more than 20 years, and the founder of Times of Entrepreneurship, which is a journalism website covering small businesses across the U.S.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks
Awesome.
for being here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Seth. Lauren, nice to see you. We met actually in at the EforAll I don't remember what we were calling it, but in Brad's barn back when we used to get together in person more regularly. And Adriana, it's great to have you joining us. So by day, I'm a venture capitalist. I'm one of the co-founders of Foundry Group, which is, we say still based in Boulder. It's not really based anywhere anymore. We gave up our office in the pandemic, and like half of us live in Longmont. So maybe I'll just call it a Longmont-based venture capital firms. I'm a big Longmont fan. And of course, along with Elizabeth, I'm the co-author of The New Builders. Also very involved with EforAll. We met David and Desh, who are the founder and CEO and founder of EforAll through the writing of the book. But I've gotten much more involved now with EforAll as we've brought it to Longmont, and I've been working very closely with Carolyn about how to expand and how to make sure that we keep our programming as awesome as it's been. So excited to share more. I love these kind of hybrid online, offline events. It's great.
Me too. Well, thank you so much, Seth and Elizabeth, and Lauren and Adriana, for everybody for being here today. So this panel is called The Future of Entrepreneurship in America. And so one of the things that Elizabeth and Seth outline so well in their book, The New Builders, is first the current state of entrepreneurship in America. And so I would love to, if Seth or Elizabeth, one of you want to kind of kick things off with talking to us about the actual current state of entrepreneurship and how you speak about that in your book.
Yeah, I guess I'll start and then turn it over to Seth. So what we write about, so I'll tell a little bit of the backstory of The New Builders, because for us, this book was a real journey of discovery, and I hope it is that for readers as well. So what happened is that Seth and I decided we would write a book about entrepreneurs across the United States, not necessarily in Silicon Valley or New York, which were the worlds that we kind of knew the best from our careers as a venture capitalist and a business journalist. We decided to write the book up just about 2 years ago, almost exactly, I think, maybe a little over 2 years ago. But as we dug into the numbers, what we discovered is that entrepreneurship in America is on the decline. It's seriously on the decline. We say sometimes that it's dying in the United States because the decline has been pretty steady and pretty marked over the past 40 years, and it's accelerated over the past 20. Now, we're seeing an uptick now, usually after recessions, and during recessions, you do see a surge in entrepreneurship, but the long-term trend is definitely downward. When we discovered that, and I say discovered as in this is pretty well known in academic circles and certain think tanks, but it just hadn't filtered into the consciousness of the American people. And it really wasn't part of the awareness of powerful people in the United States either. I think that's because they had been lulled into thinking entrepreneurship was okay because the high-tech entrepreneurship is thriving. But when we looked at the numbers, we realized a couple of key things. One is that only about 1% of entrepreneurs of startups take venture capital. So that idea that entrepreneurship is thriving based on what's happening in the tech VC sector is just totally wrong, right? Because 99% of businesses face a far different reality. And we figured out a bunch of other things, which I'll let Seth talk about. But what I'll say is that when we found that, we took that finding, entrepreneurship is really in trouble, small businesses are in trouble, startups are in trouble in the US. When we took that new finding of ours to our friends in the media world and the finance world, a bunch of them didn't believe us. They just flat out thought we were wrong. And we showed them the data, of course, and eventually, you look at the data and you figure out that that is indeed the truth. But that finding the fact we didn't know about it and the reaction from our peers made us think that we were telling a very important story. And so that's really what kicked the new builders into gear. And then I'll turn it over to Seth to talk about the other conclusions in the book, what we discovered as we went along, and how it got even more urgent in the pandemic.
And I think that the other conclusions are really important for an area like Longmont, right? As we think about sort of what's going on in Boulder and how we can better support entrepreneurship more broadly. So the other key trends that we uncovered as we did the research and wrote up the new builders is that the very term entrepreneur, right, our view of entrepreneurship has been overtaken by Silicon Valley in ways that are pernicious and really detrimental to the overall dynamism of our economy. And specifically, we've narrowed our sort of our terminology, if you will, around entrepreneurship to really mean just tech entrepreneurship, which is really unfortunate. That's not what entrepreneur meant 100 years ago, right? Entrepreneur was a word that described the corner store owner, the farrier, the blacksmith, really everyone who was starting a business or operating a business on their own. And we've dangerously narrowed that definition. And we can, if we have time, maybe we'll talk about some of the history there, which is kind of interesting. It was really Ronald Reagan who narrowed the definition, kind of used it as a diplomatic tool in the Cold War to really differentiate the United States and sort of the innovation that was happening primarily at the time in Silicon Valley, much of which was government funded as well. But in so doing, Silicon Valley sort of took it over, and we think that that's problematic, right? Only about 1% of companies take money from venture capitalists, Elizabeth mentioned, and the vast majority of companies aren't high-tech startups. Although many are technology enabled, but most businesses are businesses, right? And the shops that you would pass on Main Street are companies that are working on community spaces like Adriana, and it's a much broader set of businesses than most people realize. And then related to that is sort of key theme number 3, which is that we've somehow devalued businesses that sort of aren't scaling, that don't have this sort of massive growth potential. And we think that relates to this sort of overtaking of entrepreneurship and the term entrepreneurship by Silicon Valley. There used to be lots of value that was ascribed to people that built small businesses because that was something, they were passionate about something and they built a business around it, or they wanted to build a life for themselves. And again, as Silicon Valley has taken over our view on entrepreneurship, we've come to only value businesses that can scale, because that's sort of the vernacular and the mode that they need to be in for Silicon Valley to be successful. But that's not really true across the broader economy. Silicon Valley likes to talk about unicorns. Elizabeth and I like to talk about camels, right? A little less sexy. They're actually real, so that's helpful. But the workhorses of the economy, and what we really need from an economic development perspective, the economy actually needs a lot of camels, not necessarily unicorns, because they're so few and far between, and the failure rate of companies in Silicon Valley is something upwards of 65, even 70%. So those are the kind of the main themes. And then, of course, the big thing we talk about in the book is just that the face of entrepreneurs is changing. We've got 2 great examples of new builders who have joined us on this call. But the truth is the people who are starting businesses today are much more likely to be female. They're much, much more likely to be people of color. The fastest growing group of entrepreneurs are Black women. And actually, Elizabeth crunched some numbers a couple of weeks ago and put it in a Forbes article that she wrote up. But we believe that white males are actually the minority of business owners right now. And then the last thing, which we'll touch on, which kind of wove its way through the book that we wrote, is this idea of community and this the deep attachment that new builders in particular, but entrepreneurs in general, have to place and to their community.
Wonderful. Thank you, Seth. And thank you, Elizabeth. So Lauren and Adriana, I would love to hear a bit from you guys on your entrepreneurial journey, and maybe some of the barriers that you faced leading up to starting your companies, and relating that back to the idea of entrepreneurship and supporting small businesses and the importance of building that community that that is supportive?
Yeah, and I think we'll probably touch on this a little bit later. But for me, when I was getting everything started up, like that's why EforAll, big shout out to EforAll, was like such a big thing for me, is because I didn't really know what to do. I mean, I know I had an idea. I knew I was like, yeah, like this is something that I think I want to explore. Like I wonder what it would be like to start a company. And like you realize like there's just an ocean of information and you like kind of don't really know where to go. Like it's overwhelming. Like if you just Google, how do I start a company, or like, how do I start an ed tech company? Like the amount of resources and like information that's available to you is amazing, but like where do you start? Like there's not really like
Yeah.
a, hey, like make sure you have this, make sure you have this. And as you start to get into it, obviously those things become clear. But I think like just the fact of like starting a company is such an abstract like idea that, I mean, I think honestly probably one of the hardest things is just like getting started and knowing where to go.
Not in Adriana. I mean, absolutely. Sorry, Lauren. That is something we hear from a lot of the entrepreneurs that we work with, as there's just, where do I start? Right. And a lot of it too, I think, is being able to have that push to start. Right. And being able to have those people who say, hey, this is a good idea, and this is how you run with it. And that's a big reason we are really, really supportive of mentors and within EforAll, and building that kind of mentorship community. And Adriana?
Yes. I think something like very important in the whole process of building a business is like, how do you move from survival tool that is like, maybe is this an alternative because I need to feed, I mean, I'm a single mom, mother of 3. It's like okay, I need to have incomes and things like that. How do you move from a survival mode to more like a thriving? And so that's has been like a very good experience with EforAll, because then it helps you not only providing you tools like how to start, like how to do like marketing and all the financial support and everything, like how to even create a spreadsheet like with the whole information and things like that, but also like building a community of learning which supports you to believe in yourself and say, okay, we know that we may have many barriers, structural barriers and many other things, as they were describing, like a very complex context for business and entrepreneurship right now. But when you believe in yourself and you start making all these connections, and it actually helps you to build a community. I think entrepreneurship, it can be kind of like a lonely path, but also it has to be a community path, because you have to support each other and things like that. So I think that's a very, very good thing that I got from EforAll, like getting to know a lot of people, all the mentorship and all the other business that I'm working with. And my cohort was like only Latinx women, very powerful, and that's like a very, very good experience for me.
Wonderful. And Elizabeth and Seth, and I know you've worked with a lot of, well, throughout your book, you interviewed different new builders, and I'd love to hear about your experience working with them, and kind of maybe outline some of the ways that we can further support new builders like Lauren and Adriana.
Seth, you want to start on that one?
Sorry, just getting over to my mute button. Yeah. So, I mean, we talk a lot about this in the book, right? I mean, I think, much of the book the book is sort of split, right? We spend a lot of time talking about the research and sort of explaining the state of affairs. And then we spend also quite a bit of time just telling stories of new builders, because we want people. It's why we are excited to be on panels where we're really featuring new builders, because we want people to really understand kind of what the landscape actually looks like. What are people interested in building? What companies do new builders undertake? But there's lots of ways that we need to change our systems of support for new builders, starting with finance, but also extending through mentorship, right? And I think we've already heard this a little bit in the stories that Lauren and Adriana have told about the power of being in community. And so it's probably the better place to start, just given that we're on a panel that's featuring EforAll. But one of the reasons that EforAll, we're such big proponents of EforAll and why it's been such a successful program is it's really important to have community and mentorship and access to advice and in some cases just examples of other people who have gone before you. The tech world has done that actually quite well, right? I mean, we sort of joke in the book that there's a lot of ideas that Silicon Valley has kind of usurped or kind of pretended like they came up with that really they got from somewhere else and they've kind of taken credit for. But one of the things that Silicon Valley didn't invent, of course, but really did perfect in a way that I think some of the broader economy could benefit from copying is this notion of mentorship and working together on these broad problems. And platforms like EforAll, we talk about a handful of others in the book, are just really critical to addressing needs beyond just finance. But that said, Elizabeth, maybe you want to talk about kind of the finance side of things, because finance is important, right? It's the lubricant that helps businesses both start but then also grow.
Yeah, we talk about this. There's one really interesting example toward the end of the book where Catherine Finney, who was the founder of Digital Undivided, which was a support organization for women of color. Early in the pandemic, she took $5,000 she had been saving for her family's vacation and put it into a fund and just started giving it out in, I think, $50, $100 increments to women. And all they had to do, all these women founders had to do to get it was just show they had a website or a bank account, very minimal kind of proof of a business. So this money just went flying out of the door. And then the response back was incredible, where all the women business owners, it created an online community on Instagram. And they all started sharing about what that tiny vote of confidence had meant to them. And I tell that story because it's kind of the transition between this idea of emotional support for entrepreneurs and finance. And those two things are just kind of inextricably tied, because it's when someone writes a check, whether it's an investment or a loan or a grant, when someone writes a check, it's really an emotional affirmation, right? And the idea then that can be that you have an ongoing relationship with that entity, or that they will introduce you to a larger network of other people who have money and can support you both emotionally and financially. That's the incredible support system that exists for entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, and that is starting to be built piecemeal across the country for other kinds of entrepreneurs. And EforAll is an example of that. But it's an uphill battle right now for small businesses who are in the broader economy, because our system of finance for them has really collapsed in the past couple of decades. There used to be 14,000 banks in the country, and now there are 5,000. And most of that decline has been in the world of community banks, which are so critical to small businesses, because they're the banks that are capable of creating that ongoing relationship that entrepreneurs and small businesses need. In fact, when we were working on the book, this was what we call in, like academia, an emergent finding, right? We figured out as we went along that pretty much every new builder we interviewed eventually had made their way to a community bank or a CDFI, a community development finance institution. And they were just playing this critical role that most people hadn't even realized. And in fact, in Washington, right, they're writing rules that are forcing community banks to shut down. So it's like this huge disconnect between what entrepreneurs of today need and what's actually happening in the economy. So I'll end there. Obviously, Seth and I can talk about things.
No, it's
questions.
It's so important and so interesting. I I wonder, in Lauren and Adriana, if you feel comfortable talking about any of your financial barriers, I'd love to hear your comments on that. And if not, maybe discuss another big challenge that you've had to overcome in launching and growing your businesses. Oh, Lauren, I think you're on mute.
Oh yeah, sorry. So yeah, in terms of like finance issue, I'm like trying to think of one off the top of my head. I mean, outside of the fact that like you're a startup and you don't have any money, like other than that, like general, like the definition of a startup, I think, and again, like it's one of those things, like if you don't come from the business world and you don't have a big business background and your family wasn't like in business, like you would have no idea what the investment world was like. And I mean, like I probably spent the first 6 months of starting a company just listening to podcasts and listening about like how people invest and like watching shows on how people invest. Like there was never a crash course for me to figure out what an investment was. There's not really a crash course out there for, especially for early stage people, about like, you know, what you would need to look for if you were looking for an angel, if you were looking for a VC, if you were looking for a bank loan. And so I think like the beautiful and also the tough part about being an entrepreneur is that it's just so wide open. And so like those funding sources are available. You just have to either know the right people or know where to look. And those are two things that aren't readily available to most people. Because if not, you're just like kind of shooting fish in a barrel, and you can apply to all of the money in the startups and the accelerators. But pretty much all of the financial traction I've had is just because of like based on like people that you know. But I was lucky enough to grow up in Longmont, which is right outside of Boulder, which is like a tech hub. So even being a Black male in this space, I was kind of given a leg up because I grew up close to people with money. Whereas, I mean, I've got friends and I've got people who are starting different accelerator, like different like companies and different accelerators, and they haven't had nearly as much access to capital as I have, just based on where they live. And so, I mean, this is like it's a problem, and I've gotten lucky enough that I live out this way, but I got lucky. Like I'm the exception, you know?
Yep. And Adriana?
Well, yes, about the financial aspect, I think it has been also, well, it has been for me a challenge. And also, I agree with Lauren about the networking. Is like how important it is in this case. Like Luna Cultura is a for-profit business, but I try, my model is like business to consumers. So actually my final consumer won't have to pay for the classes or for the trainings and anything. So because what I'm trying to do is like close the gap of accessing art and maker education for all the communities that I work with. So what I try to do is to connect with these sources that sometimes I get like I write to get a grant and things like that. And then it has been like an alternative for me on the having funding. So that's, and that supports what I'm doing directly with the communities, because then I'm able to provide like all the materials and everything. So actually the people that participate in the trainings, because that sometimes for them is a big barrier, like to have to pay for a art class or something. So I'm trying to search for different ways of funding my activities in order to provide these services.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's speaks a lot about you as an entrepreneur, you know, as you're finding other sources to fund those operations. And so okay, so let's see, Elizabeth and Seth, do you guys have any final notes on the new builders before we go into Q&A?
Notes on, well, I don't know. I think it has been really great to see the momentum building around the book, and to see that we are at a moment in history that people that this combination of the pandemic and all of the inequality in our society that became more apparent, like we just hit the timing of the new builders was very good to shed light on the people who are really the backbone of the economy. And so I'm just really happy that we've been able to do that and to push that narrative forward onto the national stage. So I feel really great about that. And also just want to say, it was hugely fun and like inspiring to meet people like Lauren and Adriana, who are building these amazing companies, despite all the extra barriers, or maybe not extra barriers always, right? Like Lauren was saying, sometimes it's an advantage, right? But navigating a complicated landscape. So that's been incredibly fun, and interacting with small business people. I think everybody missed it during the pandemic. So I hope that emotional awareness translates into more support for new builders. That's what I want to say. Seth probably wants to say a couple things too.
Well, I would encourage people to go get the book and read it. I mean,
yeah,
we wrote the book because we care about and are passionate about the future of entrepreneurship, and specifically this sort of broader vision that is the reality of entrepreneurship in America. And I think it's been Elizabeth opened with this, but the reaction that we've had to it, it's unusual for a book on small business to be successful, certainly as successful as this one has been. And I think it's because people can relate to new builders. They walk up and down main streets and they have friends who started businesses. Like everyone knows lots of new builders. And I think that, really being able to dig into the statistics around them, but also in a way that's very accessible and hopefully well written. I don't know, but at least we're told it's an easy read in the sense that it's a delightful read, and a storytelling way of writing about it. So I hope people will take the time to read it or listen to it now that the audiobook's out, because it's such an important message and something that we're trying to share with a broader audience.
Yeah, I will second that. I honestly had so much fun reading it personally. So I definitely encourage everyone to grab a copy or listen to the audiobook. And you really get to hear those new inspiring stories, and just like Lauren's story and Adriana's story. And I'm very, very thankful to be here with you guys today. And so let's see, going into Q&A. Sorry, I'm not positive how to do this. So 1 second. Do I just open it? Okay. Sorry. While I'm pulling this up, Lauren and Adriana, do either of you have questions for Seth and Elizabeth?
Or we can go the other way, but Lauren's talking, you're mute.
Yeah.
I just said shoot because I didn't have any questions, right?
I'm a journalist, so I always have questions. So I can ask you all some questions. But Adriana, do you have questions before I jump in?
Well, considering that you have researched all this, like all the context and specifics, like everything, like what would be your advice on, like, in order to actually make more successful business?
Yeah, well, I can tell you what entrepreneurs have and small business people have told me over and over again over the years, that the key turning point comes, but this is farther along, I think, than either of you, but the key turning point is when you can turn over kind of the day-to-day stuff to somebody that you've hired. And that's when your business really starts to scale, because you can devote time to thinking more strategically about it. And then in the early years, I mean, small businesses over the years, just, they have told me, I'm of course a small business owner myself, and I totally don't follow this advice. So, but what generally the advice is that as much as you can, you've got to connect with other people. It's what we said before, right? But not only for the emotional support, I think it's looking for partnerships that might not be obvious in the beginning, but partnerships that can really propel two businesses forward at once. So maybe that, I've heard that definitely from small business owners over the years.
Okay, great. So we have a question here for the panelist. How has the pandemic impacted entrepreneurship?
Want to go, Seth?
Sure. Elizabeth alluded to this, but and this is not uncommon. I mean, often in times of crisis, people turn to themselves, right, to entrepreneurship, to make their way. And so we've seen a drastic uptick in new, at least as measured by the applications for new business licenses since the pandemic started. Not uncommon. We see these sometimes when when there is a shock or disruption to the system. Unclear how what businesses people are starting, and it's unclear whether that's a sustained trend. We hope it is, right? I mean, we think that would be a positive outcome to what has otherwise been a really challenging time. One of the other things we noted, there was a great Upshot article in the New York Times maybe a month or two ago, essentially asking the question of whether these stimulus checks that people got, individual stimulus checks that people got, turned them into entrepreneurs, right? Because it turned out that people were taking that money, even though it was from a business scale perspective, wasn't a lot of money. We're talking kind of $1,000 checks here, and used it to start businesses. And of course, Elizabeth and I thought it was such a rhetorical question. I mean, of course they were. And so, it really, to us, begs the question, if people become incredibly entrepreneurial because you hand out $1,000 checks, what happens when you direct that money a little bit more specifically to people with business ideas and make the checks $10,000, right, or $100,000? And so, we that is what we think the opportunity is. By the way, there were also some federal programs, the EIDL program in particular, to some extent the PPP program, although that was more of a loan forgiveness program than it was sort of a true small business loan program. But so many businesses took money under the EIDL program, and I hope have provided maybe a little bit of a roadmap for how we can do a better job of financing our entrepreneurial economy. We only, Elizabeth mentioned, about 1% of businesses take money from from venture capitalists. Only about 17% of businesses take money from banks. And that really is the gap that we need to solve for. 82% of businesses are left on their own, and they raise money from friends and family. They take money out of their home equity lines, or they start their businesses essentially without any capital. And so closing that gap, finding innovative ways to fund those businesses, not necessarily big amounts, right? I mean, to my story about $1,000 stimulus checks, $10,000, $25,000 goes a long way when you're starting a small business. Perhaps the EIDL program will be a bit of a roadmap for how to do that. I think that there's some silver linings here to the pandemic.
Absolutely. And that's something with EforAll, we do provide small amounts of seed funding to entrepreneurs as they go through the accelerator program. And it's always great to see, what type of ask these entrepreneurs are making, right? It's, if it could be something for a piece of equipment, it could be funding to design and launch their website, but kind of those things that are in the beginning very, very necessary, but do have those costs and have to be able to cover those. And so, absolutely agree on being able to build and discover other ways of providing financing to these companies. Okay, and let's see, we have one more question here. What are the 3 qualities every entrepreneur should have?
Seth, I'm curious for your thoughts, and then I have some too, but you go first.
I'd love to hear also Adriana and Lauren maybe
that's
answer
great.
that question first, since they're more in the
Yeah.
trenches.
I say the first thing is you got to be able to take a punch. I always tell people, like, you got to be tough as nails to do this, because you're going to have people tell you it's a bad idea. You're going to have to tell people, like, I wouldn't do it this way. And I think, like, if you can just kind of weather those storms, you could be an entrepreneur. Two, you got to care about it, because you can't weather those storms if you're just in it for the money. Well, you can, but you got to really, really be in it for the money. So you either got to really be in it for the money, or you got to really care about what you do. And then three, you kind of got to be a little crazy, and like, and like, I think that was always my favorite, because you kind of have to be a little crazy to just say, like, you know what, like, I think I could do this better, and just take the leap. So yeah, those would be my three.
I think also, I think you have to love what you're doing, because you actually is gonna sleep with it. So, and also like being aware of taking care of yourself, because it requires like a lot of energy and time, that sometimes you say like, well, I have to do it, and because you're starting, you're almost by yourself, and you have to be aware of taking care of yourself. So I need to that awareness. And yeah, I agree, a little bit crazy maybe. Yeah.
Those are great. I think it's so interesting to think about how those would differ if we were talking to tech founders, or the more traditional, like white male business people of 20 years ago. Because I think that what you need now is a little bit different. I do think it takes more courage to start now. So I think you need courage. And I think you need the ability to network. I think that ability to connect with people is more crucial than it has been, because if you're starting out with not a lot of money, you have to be able to do the other piece of that, the networking piece. And then I would just say persistence, because as both of you said, right, you're going to get knocked down a lot. You got to get back up.
And that's what we love about new builders and about entrepreneurs, right? Is that optimism, is that persistence, it's that like little bit of crazy. We talk a lot about, we described it as grit in the book, but we talk a lot about the importance of grit, the importance of persistence. And I don't think we went in thinking about the importance of optimism, but we certainly came out of it feeling very optimistic, despite the fact that we truly wrote the book in COVID. We did the research ahead of COVID, but then we started writing essentially right after COVID hit. And one of the reasons we wrote so quickly was because we realized that COVID was affecting new builder businesses more than the average business. And I think we were a little worried as we checked in with all of the companies that we had highlighted in the book, at the end of the pandemic, right as we were going to press, which for us was sort of February of this year. So the book is very current, right? We really truly finished writing it like as they were printing pages, we were like finalizing it. But it turned out that, people were, despite many hardships and people having to close their businesses and having to lay people off and sort of make things work, they were incredibly optimistic. And I think that optimism rubbed off on us, certainly as we describe it in the epilogue to the book, which is the last thing we wrote, which was February. We really felt, I think, more optimistic, frankly, than either Elizabeth and I sort of had felt during the pandemic, because new builders are so optimistic. It really rubbed off on us.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you for those answers. Absolutely agree. And working with entrepreneurs is a crazy time. It's a wild ride, and I absolutely love it. So thank you guys again for being here. And don't forget to get your copy of The New Builders. And that's it for the day. Thank you so much. And next up we have a 10-minute break, and then we have a panel on accounting and forecasting. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks
for
everyone.
having
Next
us.
time in person.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So nice to meet you.